Welcome, everybody, to the Good Data Podcast. We have a great show for you today. Eric Kainer will be talking with us. Eric is an entrepreneur and analyst in like a dozen different tech domains. He's the principal of the KDW Group, which sells data center equipment, including embedded storage. He's got an MBA from Wharton in strategy, operations, and public policy, and also qualifying in finance. I met Eric because he worked in the same office space as me in Princeton, and every once in a while, we'd strike up conversation, which you'll hear about. He's the type of guy who will just talk to anybody, like engage with anybody. When he came to the studio, we talked for over an hour in a pretty wide-ranging conversation, from business to technology. I learned a bunch of stuff from him about wireless technology and cell towers, and also we talked about going green and how it's nearly impossible to sell programmers and server admins on energy-efficient servers, even though that's like exactly what they should be doing with their bottom line. Eric's just a really nice guy, and I really enjoyed sitting down and talking with him. Let's go. I appreciate you coming in. I mean, I know you're busy and you got a lot of stuff going on. And, as an entrepreneur, I kind of commiserate with the difficulties of it.
Well, after I get this all wrapped up, we'll go grab a cup of coffee sometime.
Sure.
And then I'll kind of tell you all the things that have been going on in the background that you guys haven't seen. So
Yeah. But, being an entrepreneur, finding a niche within the market, how was it that you got into data centers? What was data center, the pull of it?
So it's a good question. So fundamentally, I am an analyst. And, I'm an analyst, which is kind of a front end of being a strategist, right? So my background is in technology and then in telecom. I've been in telecom basically since 93, since I graduated from grad school, right? And so I've covered every part of the industry, and I think the industry is kind of morphing into, three specific pieces, okay? There is data centers, there is the cell site, and then there's the connectivity, right? Primarily fiber, but, that includes wireless or what have you, right? So if you look at kind of a three-pole telecom world, each of the three is important in very different ways. And in fact, they're fantastically different businesses, right? So we looked at it and said, okay, I've done a bunch of work, quite frankly, in all three. The one that I spent probably the most time on was the mobile part, right? The cell sites. And one of the things that had been most intriguing to me is the evolution of the cell site. So I'd spent a lot of time on the mobile side, and there's a lot of evolution in that specific segment where you're starting to see vertical services where the tower center management companies are providing more services as opposed to having each cellular company come out and service their own gear. So that's one thing.
That would be the company that actually manages the cell tower site, like a Crown Castle,
That's
or
right.
like it can be a REIT
SBA or whatever.
Yeah, okay.
American Tower, you got it. That's exactly right. And in some cases, I expect that that they'll turn into, at least some of those will turn into general purpose REITs, right? So American Tower is structured as a REIT, although I don't think most people normally value them that way, right? So that said, another thing that's been happening, or that they've talked about happening in the cell site, is micro data centers. And so that was kind of my first time of really thinking about what a data center is. And so, Drew, that one of the things that we first started with was the modular cabinets and containment. And one of the reasons that really kind of fit strategically, although it was really more opportunistic that the way it came to us, the reason that really fit strategically is because we could make custom sizes that would fit in a hut at the base of a tower. Okay? That's very important. In fact, we continued to work in that area. We're working a lot of times with companies that are doing work in IoT, especially smart cities type programs, right? So that's one thing that we had worked on. And then that kind of naturally led us into thinking about the data centers, both because of our analysis, but also because we now had a product that was relevant to data centers.
So can I stop you? So when
Please.
you're talking about actually putting a hut or something at the cell tower, so you're actually
That's right.
talking about having a cell tower, there's power there, there's connectivity there. So you would actually put some kind of a building or shelter in that space and actually put computation in that hut. Is that kind of what
That's
you're talking
exactly
about?
right. So if you want to think about what a tower site generally is, you've got the physical tower, the steel tower, right? And you've got all kinds of radios up top, right? And it used to be coax, but now it's all fiber connectivity. And then at the bottom somewhere, you've got what I'm calling a hut, right? If it's in a city, it's actually a room or a closet in a building, right? But in there, you have, generally speaking, kind of the communications gear, which looks to you and me like a computer, right? And now they're actually bringing computers into that site to provide, short latency services from the cell site. Now, you're obviously not putting a lot of stuff there, but you can put kind of the most valued content there. And so that's what we're seeing, especially, they probably started talking about this 15 years ago. And we really are only just seeing some technology getting deployed there now, partly because, as you know, in what you do every day, power is a key factor, right? How much power do you have on a tower site? You have as much as you have, and you have no more, right? And so you're talking about base load power, which is the hardest stuff to get there, and nobody's running more power out there so that you can run some extra servers. That's just not happening, right? So, but and I'm happy to talk more about the tower sites as you like. But that really kind of was what drove us then into data centers, because now we had relevant products for the data centers. Subsequently, we started talking with LED lighting manufacturer, which is a great way, again, to focus on energy efficiency, in every application. And then the third thing that I saw was the data storage technology. Data storage is terribly energy wasteful, right? And so we actually wound up, again, through happenstance, meeting somebody who introduced us to a company that has a terrifically energy efficient product for the data centers. Now, that's more of an IT play. The other technologies are really more facilities based as opposed to IT based. But that's, that kind of gets us into the conversation for data centers, about products that are going to help them manage their energy budget.
So, the interesting thing about storage is that it's ubiquitous. And, energy, we'll get into energy in a minute because I think that's, so important. But just talking about storage and the sort of how the very efficient storage fits back into that kind of, they call it the fog, right? Or
right.
The edge of the fog is,
right.
is you
Depending
take the
on
cloud.
where you put the edge, right?
Right. You take the cloud and you bring it as close to somebody as possible. You call that the fog. I was talking to somebody about that recently, and that was the dumbest name ever. But it's
there's some competitors for that, but yeah.
Yeah. But you're saying power is the most important thing, and actually storage at that edge is very important. So things like Netflix, for instance, they want to get that as close to the customer as possible to save on their cost of bandwidth, right? They don't have to move as much data by getting it as close to possible to the person. And there's ways to save and spend more on that, but that still kind of fits together, it seems like. Mm-hmm. You've got this bigger use case.
So it depends on what data it is, right? So because not all data is created equally. One of the things that we find is very high value data is the kind of stuff that's most likely to be pushed towards the edge. Okay. And the reason for that is very simple. Latency matters more for high value data. And one of the things that brings value is that it's more current or it's used by people who make more money. Okay. Very simple, right? So think of, a trading application, right? So And then there's some data that, quite frankly, is not as important. Think of cold storage, right? We call what we call cold storage or archiving, right? That's not stuff that you would ever put to the edge. That's stuff that's much more appropriate to be more centralized, right? In effectively a lower cost per bit data center, if you will, especially stuff that might not be served out to customers all that often. Think about it as long tail content, right? Now, Netflix stuff, it's interesting you bring that up. That's kind of a different model. It's generally speaking lower cost because, quite frankly, for 2 streams, you're paying, $10.68 a month or whatever it is, right? They're not getting a lot of revenue for that. And I think they just said they're going to spend $14 billion on original content this year. God bless them. Somebody's got to burn the money. I guess they are. But that's not very highly valued content, partly because the content is in big chunks also. I mean, when we're talking about high-def video, we're talking about very high data volumes. Now, that's great if you're selling storage. Right. I don't think I'm breaking any news there.
Right. Well, it's, getting back to how that fits back into entrepreneurship, right? So you saw some opportunity and, getting back into your background, just looking you up on LinkedIn, you have a computer science background. So you're still sort of
computer scientist,
right? So you're still sort of in that sector, but you morphed into something that's more sort of facilities related.
That's right.
Is that because you saw more of a value there, or from an entrepreneurial perspective?
Right. So there's a certain opportunistic aspect to it, right? But kind of one of my models for successful entrepreneurship is you kind of lay out strategically what you think the domain is. You do an analysis to see whether that's true, and you kind of true up your analysis against the strategy, and then you start in business. And then you get feedback from customers. And the customers tell you, hey, that thing that you sold me, that's really great, but it's not great for the reasons you told me, right? And if you actually listen, then you have the ability to make a pivot, right? And so that's one of the things that's happened to us, where we kind of, back-ended into the data center space. And then once we were there, we wound up with an IT product. And actually, it's the IT product that I think is going to drive us forward, partly because we originally, when we started selling it, thought it was a great energy conservation play, right? Because it's a product that, it uses about 1/3 of the power that a traditional storage device from a Dell or an HP would use. So, that's great, but it turns out that's not why people buy it. Mm-hmm. People buy it because it's a much more flexible product, thinking about it more from an IT perspective. Now, I hadn't tried to get a product that more matched with my computer science background, but as it happens, when the market started telling me, hey, this is a great product because it better supports, virtualization of storage and virtualization of data centers, software-defined data centers, and Kubernetes and Docker and OpenStack, all of these technologies that are on the come, I was like, I'm home.
So tell me about the actual product. So you have Ceph Data, right?
That's right.
Am I pronouncing that right?
That's right.
Okay, yeah. And so you have an ARM-based, which ARM is the processor, right. Uses a lot less power than the normal, Intel x86 architecture. So would you mind just giving an introduction to that and why it's a better product for that kind of thing?
So let me give you a little spiel, and then I'll give you a little chronology there also. So the name of the company is Embedded Technology. They're based in Taipei. And the product is the Mars 200 and 400 series. Okay. The 200 is a product that was introduced in 2016, and the 400 was just introduced in May at OpenStack in Vancouver. Okay. So it's the newest thing. And the new product is a 64-bit version of the 32-bit prior product. So the thing that we thought was really great about this before is that it was a software-defined storage product that was based on open source standards. And so it was very inexpensive. And we thought that our claim to fame was we were building this on an ARM-based board so that it used a lot less power than the Intel-based rivals from Supermicro and what have you, right? And so we thought that was really going to be a great calling card. And we bashed our heads against the wall for about 2 years, okay? And the people who were actually buying it, they weren't saying, oh, this is great because it's saving us all this energy. They were actually buying it because it was a more flexible way to deploy the Ceph storage technology. And Ceph is an open source storage technology, right? So, and fits very well into kind of the OpenStack way of deploying services. Okay, so what we actually wound up with was a product that was very relevant for the growing software-defined storage market. And if you want to think of what is software-defined storage, well, you've kind of got virtualization. What virtualization really means is server virtualization. It's taking the hardware and abstracting its capabilities so that you can take computing jobs and put them on any one of many, many different servers, right? And in that way, you get much greater utilization of the server resource. You're kind of pooling the resources, if you will. Software-defined networking was kind of the next virtualization to come on. And so we're seeing that has been on the come for probably 5 or 7 years, right? And again, the thing that drives that is better utilization of the networking resource or communications resource, okay? So the third leg of the stool, the one that hadn't been virtualized yet, is really storage. And we're very, very early days there.
Right.
And Ceph is an effort to bring that third leg of the stool to the table. So this is a technology that was developed, let's call it initially 10 years or so ago, as a PhD project for a student out at UC Santa Barbara, UC Santa Cruz, I think it is.
Isn't it funny how that happens a lot of the time, that just some guy is working on a project and then it becomes, especially the open standards. I mean, Linus Torvalds, who made Linux, it wasn't as if he thought that was going to revolutionize the world, but it kind of did. So
you got these smart guys talking to their professors, casting around for a PhD thesis. And I'd love to hear kind of what the original genesis was of how did he pick this as a thesis topic? But, next thing you know, he's working on his PhD. At the same time, he's got a band of brothers there, and they launch a company. And yes, in this case, he actually does finish the PhD. The guy's name is Sage Weil. Forms a company that ultimately gets split out, and it's called Inktank. Inktank, then is supporting this Ceph technology. They're basically a professional services firm. And so they're saying, hey, we'll help you implement this open source storage technology on what we call bare metal servers, right? Which is kind of the fundamental of virtualization. And so they start building up a nice little business. Red Hat takes a look at them and says, we know a little bit of something about, open source technologies on bare metal. This looks like a good strategic direction. They pick up Inktank, they buy it, for several $100 million, really a bargain. They've really done a terrific job driving that business, by the way. And now they've got a terrific storage business in addition to their virtualization business, right? In addition to the Linux business, right? And, they're off to the races. I mean, very, very competent organization. So, in fact, one that we're working on, and hopefully we'll have some deals to announce within the next year with them. So, that's again part of entrepreneurship, right?
Right.
You want to find somebody who's, technically aligned, but has more market power than you.
Right.
So you can kind of ride their coattails.
Right.
So, and that's the case for the Red Hat guys. And again, it wasn't us who kind of sat back and said, who should we partner with? Right? Oh, Red Hat. No, it was actually customers who said, this would be really great. I'd much prefer putting my Red Hat storage on this than on the stuff that I'm buying from Supermicro or what have you. Right. Say, well, you hear that from 3 or 4 customers, and even we can figure out that that's a direction that we might head.
We have to take a break. We'll be back in just a second with Eric Kainer on Good Data. Today's episode is brought to you by Greenlane Design. Greenlane has been designing, engineering, and building critical facilities for over 10 years, from small server rooms to major data centers for Fortune 100 companies. GLD has consulted with dozens of companies to improve their energy efficiency and reliability with smart solutions like building management and aisle containment. If you would be interested in a free assessment, go to greenlanedesign.com. Click on Contact and mention the podcast. So another interesting part of this is that you were talking about energy conservation, which is a huge piece of this puzzle. And it's something that is a hard sell because it's something that happens down the line. It's not that I'm paying something right now. It's that I'm shelling out money now to save money over time.
And a lot of times it's not the facilities guy who's paying that energy bill, right? Depending on the organization.
Right.
So sometimes you're just sending a dead letter.
Right.
And
it depends, right? It depends on how it's organized within the company, because a lot of times the IT people have no idea what the utility bill is, right. So they don't care. Or sometimes the IT people do know, and so they really care. But either way, there are all these levels of disconnect between the actual servers and how much they take, and then the data center itself and how much the cooling costs. And there's no universal language for that. And there was a report a long time ago by Emerson that said that every watt that's saved on the actual compute or storage ends up being an additional 2.3 watts of savings.
Because of air conditioning and that kind of stuff?
Because the processor itself takes up an amount. Right. Then we're talking about the processor, not the actual box, but then the power supply takes up an amount. Then the UPS, the battery backup, takes up an amount. And so if you add all that up through the entire stack, and it compounds with the air conditioning, because then you have to cool it all. Yeah. And so it's actually one of the best places to attack is at the software end or the compute end. So. But nobody knows that, because the metric that people use in the industry is power utilization effectiveness, which is a data center metric that has to do with the actual efficiency of the data center. So, sorry I'm talking so much.
No, this is good.
But what's interesting about that is that sort of a byproduct of what you're doing, not the initial focus, but the byproduct from an actual energy efficiency standpoint, is that by introducing this technology, they're sort of accidentally improving very much improving the total power efficiency of their.
Well, it really is. I mean, what you're talking about is best practices, right? And it really is a best practice to use as little energy as you need, and that means exploring innovative products, right? Now, not everybody has the capability, quite frankly, of trialing every innovative technology. They just don't. And, I deal here in the real world. I get it, right? I'd love everybody to trial my product, but quite frankly, I don't have that many demo units anyhow. But that said, that multiplier effect is real. I believe it. I can't tell you what the right number is. Is 2.3 the right number? Is it higher or lower? I don't know. But I know that it's not 1.0. Right. That I'm sure of. It's well above that. So I'll leave that to smart guys like you to figure out. So one of the things that we do in order to save power in this particular configuration, let's just talk about the Mars 400, is we support in 1U 8 storage drives, and those can be either SSDs or HDDs. Doesn't matter. You can mix and match. And each of them has a dedicated microserver, an ARM microserver. So that means in the box, to support 8 drives, we have 8 ARM processors. That's a lot of compute. That's a lot of compute. Even at that, we use in our 1U box 1/3 of the power that a Intel Xeon-based box would use.
So can you ARM is a company and also an architecture.
That's right.
So can you talk just a little bit about why that's more efficient and what is kind of the secret sauce of the ARM processor?
Well, the key thing is that it's a RISC processor, right? Reduced instruction set processor. And because of that, the reason people have kind of moved to RISC, and this is really something that's 30 years old, right? Mm-hmm. Is, to make things simpler. And in this case, that simplicity means you have less circuitry. If you have less circuitry, then quite frankly, you can run cooler. I'd love to give you a more technical definition than that, but I'm a software guy.
Right. No, but it is interesting. I mean, that is sort of the secret sauce. And the RISC has been around for a while. I think Macintosh used to use a RISC processor in their laptop units.
Even people who didn't use RISC processors per se used, some elements of RISC in their computing devices. So, and you're right, as far as more mobile platforms and Apple was more mobile than most, right? Mm-hmm. Certainly. And obviously on the phone side, right? RISC is very well adopted there, right? Because power is so important.
Right. So, it's, having that technical background, I think really helps to sort of lend credibility to a sales. If you're an entrepreneur, it's important to be able to back up whatever you're saying in a sales side with the technical knowledge and the background. And, I know that you were not only a technical guy, but you also went to business school. And so that's kind of how the entrepreneurship comes back. But I think you also kind of studied finance. Is that, and is there a reason you're not doing that? Or
Well, so that's funny. And it's a good question. When I actually started working on my MBA, is back when I was working for Data General up in Massachusetts, which Data General is obviously now part of EMC and has been for 25 years, right? But I actually started studying finance because I was interested in finance. And what I found over time is, as interesting as I found that, I was also very interested in strategy. I was interested in negotiations. I was interested in how decisions are made in a business environment, and I was interested in public policy. So I wound up, kind of bringing a whole bunch of things together. And, even though I studied engineering as an undergrad, I took a bunch of high-level business classes because of my outside interests, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I got to grad school, I wound up waiving most of the core, which you wouldn't think is a normal thing for an engineer. But because I had already taken the accounting and the finance and, the basic management and organizational structure, all that stuff, mm-hmm. I was able to waive almost all the core, which gave me 19 courses to play. So I wound up actually with, a whole bunch of majors, depending on how you want to count it, in grad school. But my interest really was unbounded. I wanted to know a lot of things. One of the great things about studying in a graduate business program, as opposed to things like, a medical program or whatever, is you get a chance to do a lot of freelancing. Mm-hmm. You're learning how to. You're not really necessarily focused on the theory per se. You get a little bit of that, but not very much. It's a very practical degree. Mm-hmm. And so I was learning about how to do X and Y and Z. In fact, even now, when I go back for reunions, time after time, I'll talk to professors, either professors that I had, or now that it's been over 25 years since I graduated, a lot of times it's professors who were not there when I was there, right? And they tell me the same thing again and again and again. When graduates come back, they never come back for the hard skills. They never come back to talk about finance. They never come back to talk about accounting. They never come back to talk about any of those things. They come back to talk about the soft skills. They come back to talk about management issues. Mm-hmm. They come back to talk about negotiations and how they handle these kinds of things, which I thought is fascinating because if you look at people who run any company, regardless of the size of the company, they generally have come up through the marketing and sales side.
Right.
Generally speaking. Mm-hmm. They don't come up through R&D. They don't come up through accounting. Well, they may come up through accounting to fix a company that's broken.
Right.
But that tends to be a transitory period, right? So those people are there because they have superior soft skills.
Right.
They know how to get people to want to do things that are in the best interest of the company, right? We tend to overuse maybe words like leadership, but, that is the fundamental of leadership. Getting people aligned with the vision of where the company needs to go and what we need that person to do, right?
So in terms of soft skills, there's a lot to talk about there. I mean, obviously that's a big thing in business school is explaining or working through some of those soft skills. Yeah. But it also sometimes feels undervalued. I don't know that it's interpersonal relationships, the ability to listen and have feedback and help to guide someone. So how does that?
And what you're talking about is sales.
Yeah, it's kind of selling to somebody their job sometimes, if in a leadership position. So, what I am currently looking at like Drucker and sales stuff. And so, what if you could recommend a book to somebody of learning some of those soft skills? Do you have one that you could recommend?
I always like to go back to the classic. I think it was published in 1928, Think and Grow Rich.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Napoleon Hill. It's a classic of classics, right? Uh-huh. And what he did in that book is he basically interviewed a number of the top, entrepreneurs at the time, the richest people in the world, specifically in the U.S. And he tried to draw some commonalities about what's similar about these people. And that's where he came up with things like the concept of the mastermind group, right? Which, I think it's kind of entered the parlance, almost 100 years ago today. But still, having a group.
I'm not sure what the mastermind group is.
So the mastermind group, very simply, is, getting a group of people who have your interests at heart to listen to your ideas about how you're going to drive the business forward. And specifically what he says there is, they have to be people interested in your well-being, for your sake. So in general, he's saying, don't have it be your family, right? They want you to succeed, but maybe they want you to succeed their way, right?
Right.
So, have it be people who are friends and professional contacts and those kinds of things, right? Who are interested in your well-being. But it's also really important when you're constructing a mastermind group that you bring people in with very different perspectives, right? You don't have a bunch of people who have, let's say a background in finance. Even if your business is a finance business, it's really important to have people who have widely varied experience, right? They don't necessarily need to be, all the smartest or most experienced people that you know. That's not as important. The important thing is that they have their heart and minds in the right place and that they have different sets of experiences from you so that they can provide you that feedback that you can then use as appropriate, right? It's not to say that you should just, wholeheartedly adopt anything they say, gosh, I don't think we even do that with our wives, do we?
Right. Well, so you must have a mastermind group of your own to some extent. So how did you cultivate those relationships?
Yeah, so I'm going through right now a restructuring of the company to focus more, obviously, on the storage technology, right? And so how I affect this transition, I've had a lot of different ideas, but I've bashed this around with a bunch of different friends of mine. Now, I've never brought them together as a group per se, but they're all on the same email chain so that I'm sharing with them kind of the blast of here's what's going on. And then I'll often get feedback, from just one or two of them for each email, which says, oh, well, make sure you're considering this or don't forget about that because, over time, I've got a different relationship with each of them, right? Mm-hmm. So, if I had sent that to you, Drew, you probably would have responded with something about, well, don't forget about what you did here, right? Or, hey, remember a year ago we talked about that. How does that affect,
right.
What you're doing now? So, that's one of the great things about bringing a disparate group of people together. And in today's world, quite frankly, it's hard to get, all these people in the same room, and it's not necessary. Even scheduling a conference call. Oh my gosh, yeah. It's terrible, right? So, I still, maybe I'm kind of old school here, but I use email. Right. I still use email. Yeah, I do group text when I have to, but generally speaking, I use email. It's it's a very flexible way to get feedback from a number of people. And again, I'm sure that, of the 6 or so people in that group that I'm sending the email to, I'm sure that 2 of them probably aren't reading, everyone, right? So every time I send it out, I'm guessing probably 3 or 4 people read it, right? Because they're all busy.
Yeah.
No surprise, right? But when they do read it, I get great feedback. Right. And the next time I talk to the people, Pat might say, I was meaning to get to you on that last thing. How does that affect the smart cities guys that you were talking to before, right? Or, what's the patent strategy there? Especially if you're going into these third markets, right? So, a bunch of different considerations that I might not have thought about before, but because of the people in that group, and maybe it's not technically a mastermind group, but it's indistinguishable from what Napoleon Hill wrote about. So, but it's interesting that you ask about the book, because that's something that's been on my mind. In fact, a friend of mine from high school, Blaine Elkers, out in Arizona, is in the process of producing an abstract of Think and Grow Rich, and so maybe by the time people see this, maybe that'll be available.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested because I just want to sort of learn more about. I have my own company, and I want to learn more about how to grow it and make it a better company. And I think the other nice thing about having that mastermind group is that they are somewhat disinterested, in that they can tell you the truth rather than your family. And that's hard to find, as somebody who's honest. And especially in business, there's a lot of people who you work with who have their own agenda. So finding a group that doesn't have its own agenda can be challenging. I mean, there's, but there are good people out there that you can work with and find. And, I'm working on, I guess, hadn't thought of it that way, but building my own mastermind group. And
we talk about it as a network, but there are different levels of your network, right? So that closest level of your network, if you want to think of those as a mastermind group, that's not inappropriate.
Being challenged in that way can be hard. And, so as an entrepreneur, it takes a little bit of I guess more ego or less ego, depending on how you think about it, to be able to take that, even if it's criticism, and keep going and internalize it, or sometimes to disregard it and keep going as you are. Sure. I guess obviously there's difficulties in keeping a business going. So what strategies do you have for continuing to stay in business, keep in business? You've been doing this for a long time, diversifying your...
I haven't had a W-2 job since 2008, something like that,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and that was back when I was on Wall Street. That was only for 5 years. And, outside of that, I hadn't had one since, 2000, since my little guy was born.
Right.
Something like that.
So how do you keep in the marketplace? How do you, keep yourself interested, engaged, and keep your head above water and, all that?
So let's talk about intelligence, okay? Everybody that we deal with on a daily basis is intelligent. There are really smart people in this industry. Right. Every customer you deal with is smart. Now, sometimes they do stupid things. Hey, so do we, right? So don't worry too much about that. They're all smart. They're all very talented, right? But the people who are the most valuable in that group are the people who don't just learn from their own experience, but they listen to other people, right?
So going back to those soft skills.
Right. And no, that you're exactly right. And, if we kind of rewind the tape a little bit to the earlier part of the conversation, with embedded, I heard 3 or 4 times from customers that, yeah, the energy efficiency is nice, but it's the flexibility of the product, right? It's the ability to reconfigure, because it's just one U, and I can get 8 devices in one U, and I can repurpose things, on a moment's notice. And, those things are the things that really made it more saleable. Hey, I didn't take the feedback the first time somebody said it. Mm-hmm. If I was really smart, I would have, right? I probably didn't do it the second time, but about the third or fourth time, all of a sudden, even Eric can get smart, right? Right. So, one of the marks of really intelligent people or really successful people is, yes, they're intelligent, but they also listen to other people. That doesn't mean that the people that they listen to are smarter than them. No, but they've got useful insight. Mm-hmm. And in the same way, if you're going to construct a mastermind group, you don't have to have people who are smarter than you. They need to have a different insight, right? They need to have a different angle, some different experiences. And those are the people who can teach you, right? So one of the things that my kids always laugh at is that, if they get in an elevator with me, they know I will talk to the other people in the elevator, right? And I embarrass the crap out of them, right? And the kids are used to me embarrassing them. In fact, I told them one of the principal jobs of a parent is to embarrass the children. So, and the reason that I do that is not, it's always good to set an example for the kids, but I'll do that even if the kids aren't there. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason is I now have dead time. It may only be 30 seconds, but who knows what I can learn in 30 seconds? Yeah. Now I don't get in the elevator and say, so what do you do? Who are you? What do you do? Right? I may start, with some kind of offhand thing. I never say, so nice weather we're having. I never do that, right? But, I'll remark on something and see if they take the bait. And then who knows, what idea I'll get. A lot of the breakthrough ideas that people get are from orthogonal fields, right? So you may be thinking about how to sell data storage devices to enterprise customers, but all of a sudden, out of left field, I'll hear something from my brother about, the concerns for the zoning officer in East Brunswick, something that they needed. And all of a sudden I say, wait a minute. I didn't consider that there are other people involved in this decision at Bloomberg or whatever. And, I've got another way to go at this, right? We've had a terrible time trying to get into one money center bank, which we know is interested in our technology, but has not trialed our product, right? So, I've been banging my head against the wall trying to get response from this one IT person there. And then I figured out, hey, I can go at this another way through people that I know on LinkedIn, old friends of mine who I haven't talked to in 10 years, right? And now I'm getting an entree there. And then there's another friend of mine who I was looking at partnering with on another project, and he's got, some good contacts there. So now I'm looking at multiple ways to try to get into that customer, because if you actually do account planning, and almost nobody does account planning, by the way, if you actually do account planning, which requires the analysis and the strategy, right, then you start opening up opportunities. So I don't remember what your question is, but I'm just rambling.
No, it's good. No, that's what this is all about. Just learning about, because what you're talking about is sort of sales in a way, like, being able to, sales is uncomfortable. And so, they talk about the elevator pitch. So being able to just talk to somebody in an elevator is a very useful skill, and not many people do it or can do it.
You got to practice.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think it's a scary thing for most people. In fact, for me, it's a anxiety-inducing feeling to be like, oh, I've got to, come up with something interesting to say to this person. And I think that's pretty normal. So just the fact that you, I don't know if it is a challenge for you, but the fact that you do that is fantastic practice for that sort of sales mindset.
Well, let me give you an example of that. So my my sons both went to St. Joseph High School here in Metuchen. And, one of the reasons that we sent them to St. Joe's was, the academics are good. The academics are not great, but they're good, right? But they also build men, okay? It's an all-boys school. And one of the ways they do that is by having the teachers maybe more available than they might be in some other schools, right? You don't go to work at St. Joe's because they're going to pay you the most money. You have to have a reason to want to work at St. Joe's, okay? It's got to be beyond employment, right? So that said, one thing that they encourage and that we pushed with both boys is every day I want you to have at least a 1-minute conversation with an adult, one-on-one. At least 1-minute conversation every day, right? And that is a terrific experience because you can imagine, what we were like when we were 14-year-olds. The last thing we wanted to do was have a 1-minute conversation with an adult that we didn't know. Heck, we didn't want to talk to our parents for a minute, right? Right. So, putting them in a position where they need to be uncomfortable is a growth opportunity, right? So you say sales is uncomfortable. Yeah, it is. There are people maybe for whom it's more comfortable than others, but fundamentally, especially when you're talking to somebody cold, you don't know who they are, you don't know what their background is. It's difficult. It's a challenge, but it's necessary. If you want to reach the potential for you or for your company, you need to put yourself in positions of growth, right? Right. I mean, and I'm kind of conflating personal growth with company growth for all the good and obvious reasons.
Well, I appreciate you sitting down with me. I know you're a busy guy, and we kind of set out a certain amount of time, so we're butting up against that time. But I'd just like to sort of give you a little bit of time. We talk so much about embedded and everything else, but what are you excited about in your marketplace? Like what is something that is coming up that you would, you can talk about Ceph, you can talk about OpenStack, but maybe something that's a little even a farther reach. What is exciting you about the current market?
So, I've got a buddy named Steve who I've been talking to a lot over the last couple weeks, and he's kind of becoming almost part of that mastermind group, at least for a little period of time here. And one of the things that we've kind of kicked around is, how we think the overall enterprise IT environment is playing out, right? And so there are exogenous factors that will be important, such as energy efficiency. But, the overall architecture, I think about how things are playing out from an enterprise IT perspective is, it used to be everybody had stuff on-prem. And then there was a certain centralization, maybe, Bloomberg or what have you would have a central IT, group, right? And now people are saying, put everything up in the cloud, and AWS and Azure and Google Cloud are growing like crazy, right? Yeah. Maybe even Oracle is, who knows? I mean,
it's hard to tell.
Yeah, it's hard to tell, and they could be the blind squirrel. So, that said, what I think is, the pendulum swings from one extreme to the other. It never stops in the middle. Mm-hmm. I think we're more likely to see a long-term IT environment where you will have more of a hybrid environment where you'll have some on-prem technology and you'll have some in the cloud. And what I think the way that's ultimately going to bifurcate is anything that's providing services to customers will wind up being in the cloud because you can kind of push that closer to customers if you want to think of it that way. And anything that's going to basically provide services to employees is more likely to be on-prem. Now, I don't think people are thinking about things that way, but I think they will. And I think when I explain it that way, it's probably pretty obvious, right? Mm-hmm. why it would break that way. But, right now, I think there are a number of CIOs who are far too doctrinaire with with what they want to do. And part of it might be they want to get a name within the CIO community as being someone who's forward thinking or whatever. That's not necessarily in service to their company.
Right. And
so I'm always a little bit cautious about that. I mean, hey, I'll sell data storage to anybody. Right? Well, maybe not exactly anybody. Anybody who the government lets me sell.
Right.
I have no interest of seeing the inside of a jail. I think the people who are most forward thinking are the ones who are most interested in kind of carrying the banner for their companies, right? And a lot of that, one of the things that I'm very encouraged about, more generally, is the idea of these things like, on the local side, meetups, but also any other way of kind of sharing best practices and ideas. The fact that, a lot of the business leaders that I really respect are active in, sharing their information, not just in their company, but more broadly, is really heartening, because quite frankly, I think it makes them smarter, and they bring other things then back to their company. But also, I think it makes, the industry and the country more competitive. And, hey, I'll wave the flag for America here.
Right. Well, that kind of goes back to open source. Open sourcing something is pulling back the curtain and saying, here's what we do, and allowing that to make you better by having people actively critique it and adjust it and build on it. And that makes the ecosystem better. And sometimes there's a central authority on those, pushing that out and making the final thing. But, as a company, I think there's real value in open sourcing as much as possible. Right. So it's a similar thing. I mean, you talk about the open source technology with the storage, and, there's so much that can be gained from a abilities perspective, a security perspective. Counterintuitively, you think asking people what they think of your security improves your security, really.
Well, think about just in your daily job, right? In engineering for data centers, right? You probably have, for certain engagements, a punch list, right? Now, I'm guessing the genesis of that punch list wasn't you and your dad sitting down and saying, "What do you think is important here? Let's list them out." Rather, you probably started by going to the web and researching this, and you've probably found a punch list, and you said, "Hey, let me use this." And then you said, "Okay, these 8 things don't apply to us. And, these other 7 do, but they're not detailed enough," right? And you probably used some version of open source checklisting to come up with that. And as you add a new practice or a new area that you're looking to serve clients, you probably do something, some adapted version of something like that, right? We can think of it as creative. We can think of it as smart or prudent, but it is open source.
Yeah. In the data center space, there's more of a push than there ever was. The Open Compute, which is, having Facebook, started the Open Compute project and actually put out the plans that they put out for their data centers were good. They're not complete, but they're good. I mean, it's helpful to have basic guidelines on what they're doing, and it's interesting ideas that are sort of outside of the mainstream. And
well, they're smart people.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean all of their ideas apply to you.
Right.
But if you look through enough of them, you'll get some nuggets.
Right. And especially being able to sort of see the thought process of why they got to where they are is very interesting. So I wish more companies would take that initiative and share. Yeah. And that's part of the reason I wanted to do this podcast, is to be part of the conversation about that. Because I just enjoy talking to people and learning and growing as a business person, and also as a person interested in these topics. So I think on that note, I want to say thank you very much, Eric. I really appreciate you talking with me, and and I look forward to seeing what you're going to do next.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing where you put this, and I'll put it up on my LinkedIn page, and look forward to seeing what comments come back.
Great.
All right. Thanks
a lot, Eric. That's our show. I'd like to thank Eric Kainer for speaking with us, and I'd like to thank our sponsor, Green Lane Design. Remember to mention the Good Data podcast to get that free assessment. That helps everybody. Our music is algorithmically created by JukeDeck, which is pretty amazing. Try it yourself. Visit jukedeck.com. For Good Data, I'm Drew Farnsworth. Talk to you next time on the podcast.